Facebook Live. We're going to talk about boundaries today. There's going to be another blog on boundaries next week as well. So let's get started. So these are types of boundaries you might need. Now, in saying that, that's a bit of a misleading title, because these boundaries are, we need them all. We need all of these boundaries. And these boundaries are there to actually keep us safe. So they're physical, emotional, and psychological boundaries. And they're actually a crucial component of our self care in all aspects of our lives. Um, and when we have weak boundaries, it can be quite overwhelming, particularly if we've got emotional or psychological weak boundaries. We tend to take on others' emotions and how are they thinking about us? Our people pleasing comes out. We're always trying to keep the peace, and that can feel very overwhelming. As I said, it's like getting caught in the midst of a hurricane without any protection, and we end up feeling very bruised and wounded and battered as a result. Um, and healthy boundaries, really do include our beliefs, our behaviors, our choices. They're definitely to do with our relationships, our relationship with ourselves. And I think we forget to recognize that this is a relationship that we have with ourselves every day. Sorry, but they're also our responsibility. And we're not responsible for other people's, other people, but we're not responsible for their boundaries, but we are responsible for our own boundaries and making sure they're not skewed. So, the healthy boundaries allow us to do certain things in our lives, and some I'm going to list out a few of those things this morning. They can be allow us to be assertive. People always say, "I wish I was more assertive." Well, that's what boundaries enable you to do. We can be assertive by stating our opinions, our thoughts, our feelings, and our needs, and it's done in a respectful manner. When we're being assertive, we're doing it in a respectful manner to ourselves and to others. It's also about our ability to say no, and be okay when others say no. Respect that they have the right to say no just as much as we have. Healthy boundaries also allow us to separate our needs, our thoughts, our feelings, our desires, our goals from other people. They empower us to make the healthy choices for us and take responsibility for ourselves, not for others. Okay, this is not about other people, this is always about yourself. So, therefore, then when we're doing that, they build up our self esteem and our self respect. Other things we can say about healthy boundaries are that, we won't share, we won't overshare with complete strangers. We'll only share information gradually and when we get to know somebody. So, if you're not doing that and you tend to be oversharing, then that's a hint that there's a skewed boundary there. They also protect us, as I said at the start. They do protect us. They protect our physical space, and they protect us emotionally, our psychological space as well. And they help us to take care of our basic needs. They help us to take care of our own needs. And they're also always present in healthy relationships, all healthy relationships. We're equal. We have equal partnerships with other people, not just in our intimate relationships, but with family, friends, and the wider community, as a planet. And that's where we're all treated equally. And unfortunately, that doesn't always happen, but that is what healthy boundaries, somebody with a healthy boundary would be able to do, would be able to, treat others the same as themselves. So, if we're not taught healthy boundaries as a child, or if we had our boundaries cast aside by others, and that can be in different scenarios. Maybe it was a bad relationship you had, and not necessarily a marriage. Maybe it was even just you went out with somebody, you were dating somebody, and it was really unhealthy, and your self-esteem took a knock, but your boundaries got shoved aside as well. And that can take time to recover. Maybe, you know, it was a marriage, maybe it was domestic violence, or maybe it was in the workplace. Because sometimes we can, you know, have good boundaries in one aspect or in one area of our lives, but then our boundaries in other areas of our lives can be skewed. So, you know, it can be hard to figure out, you know, what our boundaries are supposed to look like, but also where the holes are, where the gaps are. So, you know, this is what this blog is about. We're trying to work out, you know, what are the common boundaries that most people would have, and, you know, what area am I having a problem in? Is it all over my life, or is it just in one aspect of my life? So that's the first clue, is to raise your awareness. And then, you know, well, can I identify where the problem is? Where does the problem lie in respect to my boundaries? Because remember, we're not trying to fix other people. We can't do that. It's about us. And trying to fix other people is a big hint that you have unhealthy boundaries. So you have to bring it back to yourself and say, okay, can I look at the various areas of my life? And I do, in the blog, there is a wheel of life there with suggestions as an image in the blog. You should be able to have a look at it and see the different areas that you can give you ideas of where maybe, you know, I'm doing okay here, but I'm not doing okay there. And see where your boundaries are skewed. So have a look at that. There's also some questions at the start of the blog, and there's lots of other questions you can ask yourself. Have a look at it. There's a link in the description. Have a look at that. But I'm going to ask some questions with regards to the different, you know, the different areas, the different common types of boundaries as well as we go through this morning. But have a look at the other questions as well that's up there in the blog. So let's get started, because, you know, there's quite a few of them. And by no means, you know, this is all of them. This is just the most common ones we would have. So the first one is our emotional or psychological boundaries. So questions you can ask yourself around this are, you know, do you feel you have to take care of other people in any way? But in this case, it's their feelings. Do you think you have to take care of their feelings? Do you feel invalidated, or do you feel criticized a lot? Do you overshare personal information without, and this is the clue, without getting to know the person first? So you're an oversharer. Then, you know, these, and there's other questions you could ask in this area as well, but these are questions you can ask yourself in relation to having, do I have an issue with this boundary, with these emotional or psychological boundaries? Remember, you know, we all have the right to have and own our own feelings. There are feelings. We have a right to our own thoughts, and we have the right to express our thoughts. We have a right to express our ideas without being dismissed or invalidated or criticized for having them, or feel if we do speak up, we will be invalidated, dismissed, or criticized. We also have the right to differentiate between what we feel and think to that of others. And that can be hard if you're an empath, or sometimes called a sensitive. And that can be hard for you to do that. An awful lot of times, you know, you'll have picked up people pleasing skills if you have a boundary issue here. So, you know, we've a right to our own feelings and thoughts, and to take a step back and go, no, that's you, that's your thought, that's your feeling, that's not about me. So we need to, you know, take that step back and reinforce our own emotional and psychological boundaries there, in order to you know, shore ourselves up so that we can differentiate like that. You know, we and in doing that, we kind of recognize that it's our feeling, it's our thought, we own them, and as such, we're also responsible for them. We're responsible for ourselves as a whole being. But we're not responsible for others, as I said. We're not responsible for how others feel and how others think. And we should respect that. We should also respect that they have the right to think and feel as they do. But it's not on us. That's on them. So these boundaries, help us to hold ourselves accountable as well for our own emotional and psychological well-being. So that's what we're doing there. When we take that step back, we shore up that boundary and we detach from the other person's feelings and thoughts and bring it back to ourselves. That's what we're doing there. Number two, and these aren't in any particular order, so don't worry about them. Is our physical boundaries. So we're talking about our physical boundary. So do we feel uncomfortable around somebody? And there can be people we feel uncomfortable around in different areas of our life. Do you feel someone is invading your space? And there can be people, they do it unconsciously, that they invade our space, or you take a step back from them and they keep coming forward. You need to hold your ground with them there. Are you getting enough sleep? This is another physical boundary. We don't think, we think about our physical space, we think about people touching us, we think about feeling uncomfortable, but we don't think about our sleep. We don't think about, are you sticking to your working hours? Are you taking your lunch breaks or your breaks in work? And then, if you're answering, oh yes, I'm not doing any of that. Yes, there are issues there around any of those questions. Then this is where you're going to find you have a problem with your physical boundary issues. So physical boundaries, do help protect our body and our personal space. So if you stop and think about it, if you're overworking, if you're getting stressed out about, or anxious about work, if that's the main cause and you're not getting enough sleep, you're not taking your breaks, you're not eating properly, you really are doing damage to your body. You're doing damage to you. So this is a physical boundary issue. It's a skewed boundary, and we need, again, to be able to take that step back, look at it and say, okay, I need to start being more proactive in this area and set better boundaries and make sure that I'm not overworking, that I am getting enough sleep, that if I do feel comfortable around somebody, I investigate that and ask myself, why am I feeling uncomfortable around them? Because the physical boundaries are there to help protect you. They're there to protect your body and your personal space. And this also includes your right to privacy. How you define your physical space. So people invading your home would be also invading your personal space. They don't get the hint that it's time to go home and things like that. So, it also includes like what kind of physical touch you're willing to accept. I will come on to intimacy in a moment, intimacy boundaries, but this is, what's acceptable with family, friends, and even perfect strangers. What do you find to be acceptable? I know we're now removing masks in Ireland, so maybe part of that is, no, you're not comfortable enough to remove your mask. Maybe you want to leave it on, and that's okay. That's what you're doing to feel personally, physically safe. That's acceptable. So this is what we're talking about, how you're going to protect yourself physically. And this comes into, what you find acceptable. Are you going to go back to shaking hands with people? Maybe not. So again, please, be aware that it's not just about feeling uncomfortable about being around somebody. Physical space, physical boundaries are also about so much more. And they do include our responsibility to meet our physical needs. So, shelter, sleep and food would be some of your basic needs there that you have a responsibility to meet with these physical boundaries. Number 3, one we don't like to talk about. I find this conversation is something we don't like to talk about, and I've talked about finances before, but it is a boundary. Financial and possession boundaries. And yes, I'm talking about material boundaries, i.e. your home, your car, things you own, they're yours, you paid and bought for them, they're yours, they're your possessions, and you prize them. So questions around this area you might want to think about is, do you loan people money and you know you're never going to get it back. Sometimes as a family member or friend who's always borrowing money, or maybe it's just the fact that they never pay for lunch, never pay for the cups of coffee. You might need to investigate why that is. Maybe they are having a hard time about it, with their life, their own finances, or maybe it's just something you need to start setting a boundary around. The other thing you got to think about is look at yourself too. Is do you overspend? Do you live within your own means? Do you allow family or friends to borrow items without returning them? That would be a boundary issue and a boundary problem there. Do you constantly work overtime without getting paid properly? I think a lot of people's boundaries went a little bit skewed there during the pandemic, with regards to this and working hours. Again, you have to look at, was this an issue for me now that we're getting back into the office or back into the workplace, whatever it is? Can I change things up there? Can I pull back that time? So if you're not getting paid properly, then you've got to ask, why am I accepting this? Why am I accepting not being paid properly or working overtime and not getting paid for it? So if you're answering yes to questions around this, that I have issues with these, then you have a problem with financial and possession boundaries. Again, these are the type of boundaries that protect. They're there to protect what we value, our finances, our material possessions. We have rights and entitlements around money. And I want to, people, as I said, people don't like talking about this, but we have to remember we have certain rights. It's our money, we've earned it. We are entitled to keep it. Now, if you're in a relationship, you would have a mutual agreement with your partner as to how the finances would work. But you have to remember, you don't have to hand over your money to somebody else's control. You should have a say in how that money is being spent. You get to choose how that money is spent. You have the right to be paid for work that you do. You also have responsibilities with regards to, your money and your expense, your possessions. Sorry, you have to pay your bills. We tend to say, okay, I have to pay my bills. I have to stay within my budget. That's a reasonable boundary. If I own a home, or if I'm renting a home, I have to have that responsibility or be responsible enough to take care of it. Take care of my car, take care of my other possessions. And I also have the boundary there that I have to respect other people's finances and their possessions. So boundaries are a two-way street. We have to remember that we have responsibilities and rights and entitlements with our boundaries, but we also have to respect the other person's rights and entitlements around their boundaries. So this is one where, as I said, people don't like to talk about money. They don't want to, and it can be a very sticky subject. But please be aware that financial abuse does occur. It is domestic violence. You don't have to be married to somebody to suffer domestic violence. It can be, you could be dating them, you could be married to them or in a partnership with them, or you could be an elderly person and be suffering abuse as well. So be aware of that. Please stay safe and get advice. You need to reach out to the appropriate people. There are links in through the blog out on domestic violence. I've talked about it before, and there are links to agencies in that. You'll find a link to domestic violence in the blog, in this week's blog, so have a look at that one. If you click into that, you'll find a list of agencies that can help you. Number 4, time boundaries. Now this ties in with work as well, and I was kind of hinting at it around not getting paid for hours you do. I was also saying, are you overworking in your physical boundaries? So if this has been the case during the last couple of years, maybe it's time you reassessed this boundary and pulled it back. So questions around this would be, are you someone who is always at the beck and call of others? People pleasers, perfectionists tend to do things like that. Do you find yourself overworking a lot? And overworking, I'm not just talking about in the workplace, I'm talking about at home. If you're doing everything for everybody, at home too, then you have a time boundary. It's not just with colleagues or your boss or manager or whoever. Or maybe you are the boss and you're overworking a lot. You've got to look at your time boundaries here. Do you agree to do things for others even though they're capable of doing it themselves? And that's pulling on your time. Are you allowing others to waste your time? And if you're kind of saying, nodding there, and you're going, yeah, I do all that, then you have a time boundary issue. Then this is an area you need to look at. Because we've got to remember, time is a precious commodity and there's only so much of it available. We all get the same 24 hours. And once it's gone, it's gone. That's it. Goodbye. You don't get any more. So how you spend your time should really be, a top priority for you. How am I spending my time? And this, how we do spend it is very much tied into our boundaries, our beliefs, which are part of our boundaries. And do I believe I'm entitled to time off? Do I believe, I'm entitled to say no to people? It's all tied into your belief around, how you spend your time. Because the time boundary is there to protect how we spend our time and who we spend our time with. We have a choice. Who do I spend my time with? How do I spend my time? We do have obligations to work. Yes, we do have obligations to family. But we also have an obligation to ourselves, to give ourselves time. So we really need to, ask those questions. Because if you're finding yourself, working and working longer and longer, but you've got to ask yourself, why am I doing that? Why am I really doing that? If you find yourself allowing others to waste your time, and I don't just mean that you're sitting listening to people talking all the time. If they're wasting your time by getting you to do things that they're capable of doing for them. If you're covering for a colleague constantly, you're covering for your boss, you're doing their job. If you're doing all the chores in the house, then again, you've got to ask yourself, why am I doing that? Why am I doing this? Why am I not taking time for myself? Why am I not taking time to meet even my basic self-care needs? Then you definitely have a time boundary. Number 5 is, and we're nearly finished, is relationship and sexual boundaries. Now, relationships, as I said, we have a relationship with ourselves, and then we have a relationship with all the other people that we meet. So family, friends, partner, husband, wife, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever it is, neighbourhood, work colleagues. You can go out from that circle of trust and keep going out to complete strangers. So this one, though, is more related to those closer to you. So, are you finding your partner, your family, or your friends don't respect you? You feel disrespected by them. Are you finding that your partner, your family, your friends are lying to you, or are they being dishonest with you in some way? Is your right to consent, this is very important, is your right to consent being ignored when it comes to intimacy and sex? Do you find you're having trouble with intimacy? Do you have communication issues with your partner, your family members, your friends? And even then, I'd go so far as to say your manager or a co-worker. And if you are answering some yeses to that and you're nodding along going, yeah, I do, then you have a relationship boundary issue here. Again, the sexual boundary issues would be around your partner or somebody you're intimate with, and they could be a problem. That could be a problem. And if there is something there, because all relationships are based on mutual respect, trust and honesty. I've talked about healthy boundaries in relationships before, so do check that out. But they are based on, mutual respect, trust, and honesty there. So it's a red flag if somebody's disrespecting you. It's a red flag if somebody is, if you can't trust them or you feel they're being dishonest with you. And if they're completely ignoring your right to consent each and every time, no matter how long you've been in that relationship, then, these boundaries are not in place. These relationship and sexual boundaries are not in place. And it just doesn't work. The relationship does not work. Good relationships we have to be mindful of is all about, how we communicate and how we resolve our issues. How we're allowed, as I said before, take time alone. What we share about ourselves with others. This is all in that relationship boundary as well. And, we have rights, again, we have rights and entitlements to do that, to take that time off, to take our time about trusting somebody, getting to know them. We have the right to be respected. We have the right, an expectation that we can trust this person, that we can trust the person we're with, as a we're dating them, or we're in a marriage with them, or a partnership with them, or we can we can trust that our family members, our friends, I'm talking about closer friends, we have a right to expect that they respect us, we can trust them, and we're honest, they're honest, we can be honest with them and they can be honest with us. But if that's not happening, then there's something wrong there. And you can start with, well, how are my boundaries around this? But you can also look at the other person and reach out for help there if you need them. So this leads me on to my last point, and that would be other boundaries, or red flag boundaries, as I'd like to call them. These are our, non-negotiables. They're deal breakers, and we all have them. If you actually stopped and thought about it, and most of the time we don't, when somebody crosses the red flag boundary or the non-negotiable deal breaker one, the deal breakers, then, we're not going to feel safe enough to interact with that person anymore. Deal breakers can also be around how others will interact with your children. There's a boundary there that we won't cross, but we won't allow anybody else cross. So, yes, we're talking about physical violence, domestic abuse, drug abuse, alcohol is one for you. Driving while under the influence of alcohol or drugs. Infidelity is another one that could be a red flag one for you. Disrespect, being treated with disrespect, contempt, treating you like a doormat. You get the idea, but you will have your deal breakers. There'll be ones that you will have set for yourself. You may not have thought about it. And it's a good idea to actually, if you are looking at your boundaries, to say, what's my deal breaker in this area of my life? Or what's my deal breaker with this boundary? I've just listed out some common boundaries there. So if you were talking about your time boundary, what's my deal breaker there? What's my red flag? If somebody is setting off a red flag in my head around this boundary, then they have crossed that boundary. It's a non-negotiable. Definitely, you're done, you're dusted. As far as I'm concerned, you're gone. And it's okay to have those deal breakers. It's okay to have those red flag boundaries with yourself, but also with others. And the only thing I'd advise about this is, and about any boundary, is that somebody crosses the line, there has to be consequences. And you have to be willing to follow through with the consequences. So if you give somebody a consequence, if you say to them, if you cross this line with me again, you've given them a warning. There may be red flags where you don't give somebody a warning. It's just they're gone, they're done, dusted, and you're out of there. You may not give them a warning, but if you've chosen to give them a warning and they go across that boundary, you have to be consistent. You have to be consistent, follow through, and set the consequence. Because it's when we don't set the consequence, it's when we don't follow through, that's when you know, that can highlight, okay, I have a problem with my boundaries, but it also gives a mixed message to the person you're trying to set the boundary with. And they can get confused about that because you're a bit wishy-washy as far as they're concerned. If I push a bit more, she'll give in or he'll give in. So, you know, you really have to be willing to follow through on whatever your consequences are. As I said, with a red flag non-negotiable boundary, it's a done and dusted. You're out of there. You're out the door. There's a no more. That's it. With that person, but with maybe there's other boundaries where no, if they cross the line, I'll give them a warning. But you have to be willing to follow through with the consequences, whatever it was, because people simply won't take you seriously the next time if you don't. So, as I said, I will talk about boundaries again next week. I'm going to break it down a bit more for you. And all about boundaries and how you can set a boundary without feeling guilty. That's what I'll be doing next week. There are other blogs and videos, and they are linked at the bottom of this week's blog post, which is in the description below. You know, and because I've talked about multiple issues around boundaries. I've talked about red flags before. I've talked about domestic abuse before. I've talked about alcoholism and how it can impact a family and how you can help yourself. I've talked about drug issues and things like that, and they're all boundary issues. So have a look at it. Have a look at them if you're interested. If it's a particular topic you're interested in. And as always, thank you for watching. Those that watch live. Thank you to those that watch on replay here on YouTube, and I will talk to you all again next week, and as always the blog will be out on Monday.